Good morning. I'm Lindsey Lee, Marketing Coordinator with Southern California Rental Housing Association. Today is November 4th, the day after the big election, and we're here with Alan Pentico, Executive Director, and Molly Kirkland, Director of Public Affairs, to talk about some of the results from yesterday.
Morning, guys. I hope you guys had a good night. I avoided the TV myself last night, or opened the paper this morning, or my phone this morning, and looked to see what the results were. And pretty much what we expected, I think. COVID's still here, that's for sure. But in terms of the election, Molly, let's start off at the top level. How do we do on propositions, our statewide propositions?
Well, so far so good. I'm going to start with Prop 15. That was a ballot measure that would essentially put in place split roll where industrial, retail, commercial properties would be taxed differently than residential. We recommended an opposed position on that. As of now, it is trailing in the votes. The no votes are ahead. It's 51.7%. So we will see where that goes. According to the Secretary of State, 99% of precincts have partially reported. So whatever that means, there'll be some updates periodically. And we should have final results certified by December 11th.
So I should note that it's a little after 10 o'clock in the morning on November 4th. And Molly, on that proposition, what's the win on? Is it 50% plus one? Is it 55%? Is it 2/3?
I think it's a majority vote, so a 50 plus one.
50% plus one. Okay. And what about the other propositions?
Well, the big one, Prop 21, the rent control ballot measure, is going down in flames. They've called it for the no votes, and it's very similar to what we saw in 2018. Right now, it is the no votes have 59.8%. In 2018, it was very similar, almost exactly the same, almost 60% no. So that's a really good thing. Voters heard the message loud and clear that it really does not do what the folks think or say it will do and think it will do, and as a matter of fact, I think some of the numbers that we've seen in terms of rents having actually gone down and stagnated some in the last several months, whether it's related to COVID or just other market forces, probably reinforce that. So good news there. And I will, as we talk later about some of the council races, we can explain why Prop 21 is so important and Costa-Hawkins is so important in terms of local races and the potential for local rent control.
Well, that's good, and that's a good point. And we should talk about that at some point in the conversation. Is the economy. I mean, COVID's had an impact on the state and the country and the world, for that matter, and it's also had an impact on the economy. And the free markets have taken place and impacted how the industry is doing in rents and so on and so forth. So we can talk about that bit. That's a good point as well. So go on, moving down.
So we made some recommendations for state office, in particular assembly district races. And as of now, both Randy Vopel and Marie Waldron, who are incumbents that we've endorsed before, look to be winning their races. There are a few others that it looks like the incumbents will be winning there too, but it remains to be seen. Like I said, there's still some votes to be counted. And you can check the Secretary of State's website. We're going to be updating our election results page today and providing a link to that so you can go and check there periodically.
Locally, it's important to point out that here in San Diego, you can go to sdvote.com and check our Registrars website. And we'll on our webpage, we'll get out the connections for Riverside and Imperial County as well.
Yeah, and that was pretty much it on the state level. And we didn't have a gubernatorial race this year. There was only a few Senate races that were of note. Toni Atkins, who is the Senate pro tem, she won easily in her race, and there was no surprise there. And we look forward to continue working with her and her office, and especially since she's a leader from San Diego, which is rare.
Yeah.
So is there anything else that we're going to be looking for in the next few weeks of how this is going to affect our members? What can our members expect with these results?
Well, with the statewide results in particular, I really don't think a whole lot is going to change on that front. Prop 15, maybe, if there's enough votes to swing that, because it is close, but we shall see. And I'm going to double check to make sure that didn't require a 2/3, because sometimes tax measures do. But I don't really see anything on the state level making an impact. But that brings us to probably discussing the local races, because there is a great deal of impact with some of the results that we have, and I should say a lot of those continue to be counted. So, nothing that we talk about is necessarily final until those are certified. But we can probably just jump into the County Board of Supervisors. There were
that's a big change there.
Yeah, it's huge. There were 3 seats that were up for grabs. 2 were not incumbents, they were open seats. So it was districts 1 and 2. So District 1 had long been held by Greg Cox, and that was a race between sitting Senator Ben Wesso and Nora Vargas. And so far, it looks like Nora's in the lead. But again, these races aren't necessarily done. She's up she's got 55% of the vote, and he's got 45. So we'll see. Probably not a chance that will swing to his favor. In District 2, it's a race between 2 Republicans, Steve Voss and Joel Anderson. We've endorsed Joel Anderson, who we worked with very closely over the years when he was in the state legislature. That is pretty close right now, 50.28% for Mr. Voss and 49.72% for Joel Anderson. So that's one of those races where there's only a few hundred votes different. So depending on how many District 2 votes are yet to be counted, that could change. And then District 3, this was Kristen Gaspar, who's an incumbent, being challenged by Tara Lawson-Remer. And Lawson-Remer is up in the polls right now, 59.51% over Ms. Gaspar. So it looks like it's going to change hands. And the real big impacts that you should note there with the other 2 sitting members, Nathan Fletcher and Jim Desmond, is that will be a 3-2 split, 3 Democrats on the County Board of Supervisors, which hasn't seen actually many Democrats on that body over the last few years up until recently, and now is having a major shift in terms of that balance. So that will be interesting to see.
Yeah, that's the first shift in that structure in decades, really, to a Democratic majority, and so there'll be a lot of policy changes, a lot of things. I think the big thing a lot of people worry about there is the county has built up a wealth of reserves over the last 3 or 4 decades, and most people don't realize when they do improvement projects, they're typically paying cash for them, which is the best for the taxpayers from that perspective. But so now it's like, what will that board do? What will that board look like? How will it change policies? It could be positive in terms of homeless issues. You could see a stronger investment in homeless issues and the health and human services area, and maybe in some of the other environmental areas. The county's always been pretty good about, recycling and things like that. So honestly, on the forefront in most ways in that area. So it'll be interesting to see what the future brings for that board.
Yeah, and traditionally, this industry hasn't had a whole lot of issues in terms of ones we have to go advocate on, at least, divisive ones, I should say, at the county level. But we shall see. The county is weighing in more in terms of housing and housing development these days. They've also got their climate action plan, and there's always water issues. So the industry, or in the Rental Housing Association, we will do our due diligence to go start making the rounds and meet with whoever wins those races ultimately, and make sure that they know that we're a resource on issues that impact rental housing. Just like we have in the past, yeah. Yep. Nothing changes for us there, yeah. Well, that's a big, that'll be one of the big things to see what happens there. Let's go to the city of San Diego. So City of San Diego, that's interesting. Obviously, there's a big mayoral race. Todd Gloria is leading right now, and let me get down to those results. He is at 56.29% over Barbara Bree at 43.71%. Again, still lots of votes to be counted. She has not conceded, but we shall see if that changes. You know, things change by the minute. But those are the results as of now. They're both Democrats. They have been kind of billed as different Democrats, if you will. You know, with Todd maybe garnering more union support and some of the more traditional groups that back Democrats, and Barbara Bree kind of set herself apart in being a little bit more independent, willing to kind of, you know, evaluate issues more on their merits and really try to set herself apart as somebody not necessarily beholden to special interests or what have you. We endorsed her in this race, and so while we'll be disappointed if she doesn't make it, we know Todd Gloria very well from his years on the council and in the assembly, and I mean, for some of us even before that, and we hope that he'll still have an open door. We don't always disagree on the issues, but I think we like Todd, and hopefully he'll, you know, we'll still have his ear to a certain extent. We'll just have to work really hard to make sure that him and some of these new council members that we'll talk about here in a second understand our issues and really understand that we are the people you're regulating. You know, the owners and managers are the people you're regulating. You should listen to them. So that brings you know, to some of the city council races. District 1, right now, Joe LaCava is leading Wilmore, 61.67%. Wilmore conceded the race essentially last night. We did endorse Wilmore. He had a more staunch stance, I would say, against rent control and a few other issues important to us. But nevertheless, we know Joe from his work in the affordable housing world and other issue areas over the years, and we will definitely touch base with him, make sure he knows that he could reach out to us on issues of importance to the industry. We did not weigh in on District 3, but right now Stephen Whitburn is winning by 63.34% over Tony Duran. He's been, Stephen Whitburn's been around for many years, has run before, and he's pretty plugged in on various issues. District 3, I should say, is the seat currently held by Chris Ward, who just won an assembly seat last night. District 5, Marnie von Wilpert is up 55% over Joe Leventhal, who has about just under 45% of the vote. We endorsed Joe Leventhal. I'm not sure if he's conceded at this point, but he's down by, you know, almost 7,000 votes. I don't know if there'll be enough District 5 votes to change that seat. We shall see. And then District 7, Raul Campillo is winning 56.79% over Noli Zosa, who has about 43% of the vote. Again, we endorsed Noli. He's a small business owner. He's been very involved in the Linda Vista Community Planning Group and lots of other community issues over the years, and really demonstrated an understanding of our issues. But nevertheless, if, you know, Raul does indeed take this seat, we'll again do our due diligence to reach out there. And then in District 9, we did not weigh in on this race, but this was, you know, a Democrat on Democrat race. Sean Ilo Rivera is winning 62.86% over Kelvin Barrios, who actually suspended his campaign, you know, about 3 or so weeks ago due to some campaign finance issues, and he was losing some endorsements. So he decided to suspend his campaign. He did not pull out entirely and still ended up with, you know, about 11,000 votes. But nevertheless, Sean will take that seat. So what we're going to have now on the San Diego City Council is a super duper majority, if you will, of progressive Democrats. Essentially, really the only person left on there, I think, that is a Republican is Chris Cate. All the other seats are going to be Democrats. Obviously, Barbara Bree, who's District 1, if she doesn't win the mayor's seat, she will retain that seat. So really, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. It's important to our industry because traditionally, while we couldn't always stop certain issues at the council level, we could sometimes, and an example of this is the rent repayment extension associated with the eviction moratorium back in July. We can be successful in getting a 5-4 vote, which means then it's not veto proof and you have opportunity to go to the mayor and request a veto. Now, a good chunk of the votes that come out of the council are going to be, veto proof, and we have a Democrat mayor, regardless of who wins. So it's really going to be incumbent upon not only the association, but our members to help us on our grassroots advocacy at the city level and make sure that you're showing up at meetings, even if they're virtual, you're writing letters and emails, because it's going to be that much tougher.
So what you see there is that as a strong mayor form of government, you had that roadblock, but that block is now gone because they have the veto proof. They have the ability. I mean, they control the veto anyways at this point. So what I think you're going to see more than anything is the degrees of Democrats, if you will, between a moderate Democrat to an extreme left Democrat, and it's going to be a little bit harder for constituents and voters to note the differences, but there are differences, and they'll start as we get more accustomed to working with these elected officials. We'll get more accustomed to the differences in that liberalism, if you will. So I think you could consider Barbara Bria more of a moderate, middle road Democrat, whereas you go to the far lefts with some of the others. So I think that's one of the things that the constituents and the citizens in general will have to get used to. And that stopgap of the mayoral veto, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, and what goes there depending on who's elected, because that was always a key thing for the citizens to have that stopgap at that point. So
yeah, I mean, and technically, we should say that those seats are all nonpartisan.
Yeah,
and we are nonpartisan. The Rental Housing Association is nonpartisan, but nevertheless, some of those influence come into play. So again, it goes back to SCRHA doing our due diligence on the issues. We're not there to
right. We use the party terms to give up. I mean, the citizens are all. I think all of us are used to using the party terms and understanding where they sit on the political scale and things like that. And that's all we're using them for. We are quite honestly. Right. We are very much nonpartisan. We have endorsed and supported candidates on both sides and do frequently. So
it will be interesting. While we're still on the city of San Diego, there were a few measures there were quite a few measures, but there were a few that we weighed in on. One was Measure A, and that had to do with increasing property taxes to fund affordable housing. It's not something that necessarily philosophically, I don't think the association and the members are opposed to. We think, all types of housing and funding to build affordable housing is important. However, this was a property tax increase on all kinds of real property that would be in place for many, many years. And I think a big issue associated with it was the timing. You've got COVID in place with lots of businesses shuttering, and the notion of increasing property taxes on those folks wasn't necessarily palatable. We've got rental property owners who are not receiving rent and bearing that burden. Again, the timing just seemed wrong. And then there was also the threat of Prop 15, which would, alter that tax structure for businesses. So ultimately, I think voters kind of saw that maybe the timing was off. Maybe the concept isn't necessarily the worst, but certainly the timing, and that needed 2/3 to pass. And I think last I checked, it was only about 59%.
I know for many of our members, because we discussed that issue at our committees and our board several times, and the discussion is that for us from the development side and from the industry perspective, I think the cost per unit was just really unreasonable as well. I mean, by the time the bonds were paid off at the end of the term, some of these units were costing nearly $1 million a piece, and that's not the way to get housing built. So I think that's one of the things we have to look at in the future is what can we do to get the housing built in a way that doesn't make each unit so expensive? And I think that's one of the things that will hopefully be part of the discussions on those and helping to figure out how to make that happen.
Absolutely. The other measure, and I should say that right now it's 57.4% yes on A, and again, it would need 2/3, so it's got. little chance of passing at this point. Measure E was another one we weighed in on, and this has to do with removing the 30-foot height limit in the Midway Pacific Highway Community Plan area. So for San Diegans, think sports arena. And we know that that area has probably needed some some development over the years, a little more love.
Some investment.
Yeah.
Investment in terms of dollars and care and community and yeah.
And so right now it is winning 57.19%, which should get it to where it needs to be to pass. There was a lot of concern about removing the height limit and what that means for the height limit in other areas of town. And this is really isolated to this specific community
almost
plan
specifically,
area.
Yeah, almost specifically that property where the sports arena is, almost specifically. Right. Yeah.
And some, immediate areas around it. It does nothing to change the height limit in any other coastal area. That measure is still in place. There was, the opponents said that, that's a slippery slope and that's the next step. But all one has to do is look at the sports arena and know that, no, this was necessary to bring in the kind of business and housing that you need in a corridor that you ultimately want to be a walkable area with a sports complex and what have you. So we supported that measure.
Yeah. So I think that covers the major races in and around the town. Again, check our website. We're going to be having more information on Riverside and Imperial County. Honestly, not as exciting things going on. Those tend to be more stable communities in terms of shifts of power and things like that. For the industry at the moment. So the city of San Diego stuff and those statewide ballot initiatives is probably the biggest thing. We're purposely leaving out the presidential stuff. We checked before we recorded this, and there were still about 80 electoral votes to be determined in about a half dozen to a dozen states. So we'll leave that stuff to our National Apartment Association. And we'll look to continue to get you updates on these items and check our website where we had our election voter guide, and we'll be providing updates there. So is there anything else, Lindsay, you want to?
No, I just want to thank you and Molly for waking up early and going through all these results as we have them to explain it to both me and our members.
Absolutely. And if our members have questions, shoot us an email at info@socalrha.org. That's info SOCALRHA.org, and we'll hopefully address them in our next update. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for voting.